All right, so we're diving into some serious policy stuff today, huh? U.S. tax changes and big ripple effects, especially for working class folks. This ProPublica article, to pay for Trump tax cuts, House GOP could slash benefits for the poor, working class. I mean, the title kind of lays it all out there, doesn't it?
It does, yeah.
Sounds like House Republicans are really looking to make some big moves.
Yeah.
Got to balance the books after those Trump tax cuts, I guess.
You're spot on. It points to some changes, big changes, potentially, for different groups of Americans. Could hit them in different ways.
So first off, big picture, what's the deal here?
All congressional Republicans, they're working on this big old tax and spending cut package. Looks like the goal is to make good on all those sweeping tax cut promises President Trump made during his campaign.
Okay, yeah, that's pretty standard stuff, right?
Yep.
Campaign promises meeting the reality of governing. Let's get down to the specifics. ProPublica, they highlight this proposed elimination of the federal estate tax. That's the one on inherited wealth, right?
Exactly. Gotta remember, though, it mainly affects the ultra-wealthy. Estates worth over $14 million.
Oh, wow.
It's kind of ironic, isn't it, given Trump's, populist image, that this move could be seen as helping out the really, really rich.
Yeah, that's a good point. Seems like this is where we see who really benefits from these changes, right? What else is on the table here?
Well, they're also talking about a huge corporate tax cut, bringing the top rate all the way down to 15%.
Wow.
That'd be one of the lowest rates among developed nations. Kind of makes you wonder if it's really necessary.
And hold on, didn't Vice President Vance say something about this before? I thought he was against more corporate tax cuts.
He was. He's been critical of them, yeah.
Yeah.
So this proposal definitely goes against what he said before.
Interesting. Okay, so we've got these potential big tax cuts, corporations, the super rich. They're all potentially benefiting here. But the article title mentions cuts to benefits for the poor and working class. How does that fit in?
Well, that's where things get a little more complicated. To make up for the money they'd lose from those tax cuts, the proposal suggests some pretty major changes to government programs. And the main target looks like Medicaid.
Medicaid, right? That's health care for low-income folks.
That's it. And what they're saying is they want to reduce how much they reimburse states for Medicaid. Could have a domino effect. States might have to make tough choices, reduce coverage, cut services, maybe even lower how much they pay healthcare providers.
Wow. So if you're someone who relies on Medicaid, this could directly impact your access to healthcare. Sounds like a lot of people could be hit hard.
It's a big change to think about, especially since President Trump, he promised, remember, to protect programs like Medicare and Medicaid. Now his administration's backing a plan that could, potentially weaken them.
Yeah, a bit of a contradiction there. ProPublica also mentions this proposal targeting some tax breaks that families use, right?
Right. They're talking about getting rid of the child care tax credit. That's up to $2,100 per child right now.
Okay.
And they also want to get rid of the head of household filing status. That's what lets single parents and other adults caring for dependents, reduce their taxes a bit.
So no more head of household.
Yeah.
That means higher taxes for a lot of single parents.
Pretty much. And a lot of single parents are women, so this change could hit them harder than anyone else, especially those making between $14,000 to $100,000 a year.
Right.
And this doesn't really line up with what Vice President Vance was saying during the campaign about supporting families.
Right. It's starting to sound like a mixed bag here. Good for some folks, maybe not so good for others.
You got it. It's complicated. Lots of potential consequences to think about.
The article does say the proposal includes stuff that looks like it keeps some of those working class focused campaign promises we were talking about. What's that all about?
Okay, so they want to get rid of income taxes on tips. That was something both President Trump and his opponent, former Vice President Harris, were talking about a lot during the campaign. They also want to get rid of taxes on overtime pay.
Well, on the surface, that sounds like a win for working class folks, doesn't it? What's the catch?
Well, some economists, they've said that getting rid of taxes on tips is actually kind of unfair.
How so?
Well, it benefits one specific group of workers, the folks who get tips.
Right.
But people making the same amount who don't get tips, they don't get that same benefit, could lead to, some resentment, people feeling like they're not getting treated fairly.
Makes sense. Sounds like a policy that might create more problems than it solves. What about getting rid of taxes on overtime pay? Any concerns there?
Yeah, tax experts, they're worried it could actually make things more complicated for workers. Instead of a simple tax break, They might end up with all this extra paperwork and report and stuff. Could end up canceling out any financial benefit they'd see.
So even something that sounds simple can have unintended consequences. It's like, we got to look at the whole picture, right?
Yeah.
Think about everything that could happen.
You said it. Lots of moving parts here.
Okay, so we've covered a lot. Seems like this tax proposal, it's kind of all over the place. Potential upsides for some, downsides for others, and just a lot of uncertainty.
Yeah, a lot to unpack. But the big question here is, will these changes really help the working class like they promised? Or will they just make the gap between the rich and everyone else even bigger? The article, it talks about one big way they're thinking about making up that lost revenue. Getting rid of the mortgage interest deduction.
Whoa, hold on. That's a huge change. Remind me, what does that deduction even do again?
Basically, it lets homeowners deduct the interest they pay on their mortgage, from their taxes. Saves them a bunch of money. And getting rid of it, well, the government's thinking that could save them something like $1 trillion over 10 years.
$1 trillion, wow. Wouldn't that really hurt homeowners, though? Especially people who, just bought a place.
Yeah, it's definitely something to worry about. It would probably shake up the housing market in a lot of ways. But here's the thing. The Tax Foundation, they figured out that about 60% of the benefits from this deduction, it's going to folks making over $200,000 a year.
Right.
Yeah. So it might seem like it would affect all homeowners the same, but actually the higher earners would feel it more.
Huh. I never would guess that. It's crazy how much stuff is hidden in all these tax policies.
It really is. And we can't forget about the geographical side of things either. The article mentioned this deduction. It's worth more in states that lean Democrat. So getting rid of it could have some big political consequences too.
Right. It's not just about the money. It's about the politics, too. It feels like every part of this proposal has all these different interests and consequences tangled up in it.
You got it. It's all about balance, and there's a lot riding on it.
Okay, let's go back to those Medicaid cuts for a sec.
Yeah.
You mentioned states might have to make some tough decisions if those reimbursements get smaller. What kind of choices are we talking about?
Well, they might have to, change who's eligible for Medicaid, cut off people who qualify now. Or they could cut back on the services they cover, so people wouldn't be able to get the same level of care they do now. And sometimes states might even have to pay healthcare providers less. Could lead to fewer doctors and hospitals taking Medicaid patients.
Man, that's scary. Sounds like a lot of people could lose health care if this goes through.
It's a big worry, especially with, how our healthcare system is doing after the pandemic. We saw how things could fall apart, and these cuts could make it even worse.
It does feel like we're already stretched thin. This could really push things over the edge.
It's really important for, the folks making these decisions to think about what happens after, not just what it means for the budget right now. They got to think about the long term, how this affects people and communities.
Okay, and what about those campaign promises, like no more taxes on tips and overtime? ProPublica mentioned some worries about those too, right?
Yeah, those have been kind of controversial. Getting rid of taxes on tips, it sounds good at first, but some economists have said it's not really fair.
Why not?
Well, it's only helping one group of workers, the people who get tips.
Right.
But other people making the same amount but not getting tips, they don't get the same break. Could cause some problems, people feeling like they're not being treated the same.
Yeah, that makes sense. And what about no taxes on overtime? Any problems there?
Tax experts are worried it might actually make things more confusing for workers. Instead of a simple tax break, they might end up with a bunch of complicated paperwork. Could actually cancel out any extra money they'd make.
So even simple changes can have a ripple effect. Got to look at the big picture, right?
Exactly. Lots of moving pieces.
We've covered so much today. It sounds like this tax proposal, it's good for some, bad for others, and we just don't know what'll happen.
It's a lot, yeah. But at the end of the day, it comes down to this. Are these changes going to actually help the working class like they said they would? Or are they going to make things even tougher for folks who are already struggling?
Yeah, that's the big question, isn't it? And ProPublica mentions Democrats. They've been pretty vocal about this whole thing, calling it a handout to the rich, saying it'll hurt the working class. Seems like this could get pretty messy politically speaking.
Oh, yeah, for sure. This stuff, it touches on some pretty sensitive topics, and things are already, pretty heated out there. Wouldn't be surprised if this gets even more intense as they try to pass it.
So what happens now? What's the next step with all this?
Well, the White House, they're talking with Congress right now, trying to figure out all the details. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of back and forth, changes, compromises, you know how it goes. Hard to say what'll actually happen in the end, but
Right.
definitely something to keep an eye on.
It's a lot, It can feel kind of overwhelming trying to keep up with it all. What advice would you give to someone who wants to stay informed about this stuff but doesn't even know where to begin?
I hear you. It's definitely a lot to take in. But it's important to stay, plugged in, stay informed. I'd say start with good sources, like that ProPublica article we've been talking about. Look for stuff that's balanced, shows you different sides of the story. And don't be afraid to talk to your representatives. Let them know what you think, what you're worried about.
And so we got to make our voices heard. We
Yeah.
can't just sit back and watch this happen.
You got it.
Hmm.
That's how democracy works, right? When people participate, stay informed, and speak up for what they believe in, that's how we build a future that works for everyone.
Well said. It really does feel like we're at a crossroads here with this tax proposal. Could change everything. The economy, our society, all of it. So we got to pay attention, got to get involved. So as we wrap up our deep dive today, I'm left with one question for you, the listener. What do you think? Will these changes help the working class or hurt them? No easy answers, but by staying informed and engaged, you can be part of deciding what happens next. Until next time, keep digging deep and keep thinking critically.